Now that my handle and my mug have had a few days to dry, I'm gonna do a couple of things to them. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna move my plastic out of the way so you don't hear it crinkling around while I work. I wanna do whatever I can to help smooth out and clean up the interior of my mug. I want it to be relatively smooth. It's okay if you have a couple of indents and fingerprints, but I want it to be smooth. I don't want any kind of hole looking places that could catch anything that would grow some bacteria. So you want to really have that smoothed out. That might mean that you need to add a little bit more of those like little beans of clay or balls of clay in and blend them. Do your best to use your hands. Obviously, if it gets to be too tight of a spot, you can use a modeling tool. Some people like to even use, like once they've got it kind of cleaned up, just to smooth things out and clean them up, they use a paintbrush. If you have a stiff bristled paintbrush laying around, just be careful it doesn't leave any textures in your clay that you don't want. But really I want that nice and smooth. I don't want any indents where I had my feet, and I don't want anything, and hopefully you were able to use your rib to kind of clean that up. But I don't want anything showing my marks. Mostly I don't want holes. Now that I am ready to attach my handle, I personally am going to put my handle along my seam. You do not have to do that. You can put your handle wherever you wish, but I want to make sure my handle is the size that I want. If I don't want it to be huge, like this is kind of a big handle, I might want to go in and make a cut. So what I like to kind of do is hold my handle a little behind to see like how I really want it to look. And so I hold it behind my vessel to see like, okay, that would be a better handle. And make a little mark about how much I think I need to take off. And I'm just using my needle tool, but you can use anything. You can use a pencil, you can use your knife. And then I want that to be straight down on my handle, so that I made those marks into the clay, that this is completely vertical to this, so that it is the same line. And you can use your modeling tool to do that. So that is straight up and down. That's how much I want to cut off. So you can either use your knife to do the cutting, you can use your needle tool. If you have something else, like if you have an X-Acto knife at home, that's gonna work best, but I don't expect you to have those, and I did not provide you with those. Do your best to cut it perfectly straight. I did a terrible job of cutting it perfectly straight. You want to support the clay so that you are not breaking your handle. You might use your sponge to kind of smooth some things up. I'm actually going to clean it up with my needle tool as well, because it broke a little around like with the texture, and that's okay, but I'm going to make sure that I clean it up so that it looks purposeful and so that it's even all the way around. So I'm rounding that a bit to level it out. And I'm using my needle tool, just kind of scraping a little bit away. You don't have to use your needle tool. There are so many options for you. And then I'm just going to smooth that out with my damp sponge so that it looks nice. I'm going to do the same for that top piece. This time I'm going to use my needle tool and do my best to keep it straight across. Do a little bit better there. Still cleaning that up. Any cut that you make is probably not going to be perfect unless you do have an X-Acto knife. Those make really nice cuts. So then I can line this up and hopefully have this. Now this is on a curve, so I'm actually going to take, again, either my knife or my needle tool, and I'm going to kind of carve a slight curve into those ends of the handles so that they rest nicely on my mug. So I'm just getting a little groove, nothing really severe. My mug is just a soft curve as it is. So I'm going to do that so that it lines up nicely on there and my handle is proportionately acceptable with my mug itself. My mug is bigger than the one you guys are making, just so that way it showed up better in the video. I'm going to clean up the underside of my handle a little bit more. I have a couple of surface cracks that I'm just going to blend away. First, I just wiped it with my sponge, and now I'm supporting the shape and wiping it with my finger. And now I need to do that step of scoring and slip. So what I'm going to do first is use my fork to score those surfaces of the handle that I just cut. Remember, scoring is not a pretty thing. Generally, I would say that you can't have too much slip. However, I don't want to clean up a lot of slip around my handle, so I'm going to use it pretty sparingly. It will still do the job. I'm just dipping my finger in the slip. If you have a paintbrush or something you want to use instead, that's fine. But I just use my finger, and I just keep something handy, like I'm just going to use my apron to kind of wipe off my finger so it's clean. And then to know where I'm going to score for my handle on the mug itself, the body of the mug, I'm going to push this lightly and then pull it away. And where I've got the slip marks, that's where I need to score. Shows me exactly where my handle lined up. Again, I am not scoring to make it pretty. I am scoring to make it functional. Add a tiny bit of slip there, just mostly this on this surface. You only need slip on one surface, but I mostly just wanted to get that wet from slip, so I mostly used the slip water. I am supporting the inside of the mug so that I can press gently, but also make sure that these kind of go together to get my handle attached there. Now, I want to make sure my handle looks straight the way that I want it. If not, I'm going to shift it a little. Mine looked a little crooked. Didn't love it, so I shifted it. And now I have a couple of other jobs to do to make sure that it's on there nice and secure. Anytime I'm pushing, I want to support the inside and push from the outside. One thing I'm going to do is use my modeling tool to blend the undersides of my handle to the body of my handle. I want to be careful not to blend away my texture too much, but it's going to blend a little bit right there. And then I'm just going to go over it with my finger. If you can get in there with your sponge, that's great. But if you can't, don't panic. But I want to blend those together, just like we did with our coils. We blend those together. And then I'm going to get underneath this part of the handle too. And again, I don't want to lose a lot of my texture. I have a lot of really pretty texture on my handle, and I don't want to lose that. I'm not worried about losing some on that foot of my tripod cup, but I do want to be really careful about how much I'm losing on the handle. And I want to keep it nice and balanced. So I've got that pretty well blended. Again, I'm going to go over it with my finger just to smooth it out so I don't have lumps. What you see is what you get with clay. It's not going to magically dry differently. So you need to really pay attention and smooth things out as you go and as you notice them. It's like even on my foot here, I see, just probably from being a little bit wet when I had it sitting, it warped a little and had some cracks, like surface cracks, that I just wanted to take care of. So I'm going to do that. And then I really want to stabilize those joints. So the parts that I cut off my handle, I'm going to make a tiny little coil from some of that, and it's a little bit dry, but the reason I want to use this clay instead of fresh clay is because this is also a little bit dry. If I use really wet clay on clay that has dried out a little bit, I am more likely to get cracks because they are drying at different at different rates. So I want to make sure that I have the same level of moisture in my clay. So that's exactly what I am doing, is using clay that came directly from it. And I am going to make a little coil, and I'm actually just going to dip it in my slip water just to get it a little bit wet instead of scoring it. If it was brand new fresh clay, you wouldn't have to do any kind of slipping and scoring, just because of the fact that it's got higher levels of moisture in it. It's wetter clay, so it blends better. But I'm going to create a coil that goes right there, and I'm going to create one that goes on that lower portion too. So again, I'm still using scraps that I cut. And rolling them out into really tiny coils. Just little things like this, nothing large. Just dipping it in the water a little bit, the slip water, and putting it at those attachment points. And again, I'm going to use a modeling tool. I'm going to make sure it's nice and clean. So I just wiped it off actually with slip water. So it's clean in a different sense. It's just not clumps of clay. This is just going to help make, and I'm just kind of tapping down. This is going to help make that handle stronger. Again, I don't want to lose my texture, so I have to be careful with what I am doing here. But I do want to make sure, and I also don't want to manipulate my rim, so I'm trying to make sure I'm being really careful. But I want to make sure that that coil gets blended in there nicely. This tool is the perfect size and shape for that. I want to get the sides. I kind of want to push that little extra clay there so that it gets nice and smoothed out. And like I said, I'm going to lose a little bit of texture, but hopefully not too much. And if I want, and if I can always grab what I use to make my texture and try to like manually press it right there. I am not too concerned with the amount that I have lost of texture. So you can see I've lost a little bit of texture at that joint where I had the coil, but I'm really not concerned, just right here. I think I would probably do more damage trying to get the lace to go on there than I would. And so again, I'm just kind of tapping this down and pulling it around to the sides, pushing it in to the crevice of where that handle is attached. I'm getting all of my edges. If you need to use the other end, like the pointer end of your modeling tool, you sure can, depending on the angle that you're working at with your handle. But hopefully that helps just keep your handle a little bit more secure for long-term use. Now I'm switching over, and I'm using this to kind of clean up what I did. So I used the flat end, and I just wipe it off every now and then because it's going to get covered in some clay scraps. So I'm using that to kind of even it out. Be really careful with that, and if you have long fingernails, also be careful. These areas are delicate. It's a little tricky, but I know you can do it. Those of you that have the long fingernails are generally used to being aware of them and manipulating things a little bit more carefully. And I just want to get that nice and cleaned up. And then I want to take a little time to clean up the edges of my handle, because again, I don't want to have sharp edges of my handle. So I'm actually kind of taking my modeling tool and scraping a little bit at an angle. You don't have to do this if yours feels nice and smooth, but I'm scraping it a little bit at an angle so that I clean off some of that, so that way I'm more likely to have a nice smooth to the touch handle when I grab onto it. At this point, I do not want to handle my mug by the handle at all. So once I have it on there and I've smoothed everything out, I no longer want to touch the handle until it has gone through the kiln. It's still very fragile. I don't want to try to reshape this much. If you have a tiny bend in it that you want to try to manipulate, that's fine, but it's highly breakable, very fragile, and I just would like you to leave it alone as much as possible. These are going to be a little bit more delicate when you pack them up to bring them into the classroom for firing. So you need to likely find a washcloth or a towel that you can kind of lightly wrap in between here to support your handle and really pat it. So towels are great, but obviously you can use plastic bags, whatever you have to transport them. And then I would probably keep them in some sort of box to bring them to school and into the classroom when they're all done. So you'll bring them in while they're leather hard, just like this. So that way, if something were to happen in transit, we would be more likely to be able to fix it than if you let this get bone dry. So if you're not bringing this in for a while, make sure you wrap it up really tightly. But if you are completely done working on it for right now, just lightly cover it. You don't have to go underneath it. Just lightly cover it so it dries a little bit more. And then bring it to class the next time. Can't wait to see your mugs.